My wife came home furious. Why isn't the card working? Mom didn't get your paycheck. I just looked at her and said, interesting. That card issue was only the first domino, and the next surprise was about to strike us both. I locked the card before Lily came home. The decision came quickly, faster than the hesitation I usually felt. I stood in the kitchen, watched the confirmation message appear on my phone screen, then placed the phone down on the table. The house was quiet in a way that felt comfortable. I knew what I was doing, and I also knew the next reaction would come soon. I did not tell Lily. I did not need to. For a long time, everything related to money had followed a familiar pattern. Where my salary went, who was waiting for it, and who would call if there was a problem. I had grown used to that rhythm. And I had grown sick of it. Today, I simply changed direction. The door opened. Lily walked in with hurried steps, the sound of her keys louder than usual. I did not turn around right away. I heard her sharp breathing, the phone being placed hard on the table, then her voice bursting out, high and tense. Why doesn't the card work? My mother didn't receive your salary. The words came fast and straight, with no detour. Not a question about whether I was tired, not even a greeting. I turned around and saw Lily standing in the middle of the living room, her face flushed with anger. Her eyes were not searching for an explanation. They looked like an accusation already prepared. I did not apologize. I did not answer right away. I let the silence stretch for a few more seconds, long enough for Lily to feel that something familiar had just been cut off. A very clear thought formed in my head, finally quiet. No more broken calls, no more subtle reminders, no more feeling of being waited on every payday. Lily stared at me, as if trying to read what I was thinking. She stepped closer, her voice lower but sharper, asking if I knew what was happening. I nodded. I knew very well. I knew who was waiting for the money, and I knew this reaction was inevitable. I said the card was locked. Just one short sentence. No further explanation. Lily froze. Then her anger rose clearly. She asked why I did it, her voice starting to shake, not from fear, but from being pushed out of a familiar order. I leaned back against the chair, watching everything like an outsider. Old images surfaced in my mind. Meals where I was always the one listening more than speaking. Comparisons spoken casually. Mentions of money under the name of family. I remembered the feeling of being treated as an obvious part of that cycle, and it had never been comfortable. Lily picked up her phone, the screen lighting up and going dark repeatedly. I could guess who was waiting on the other end. She turned to me, her eyes mixing anger and confusion, saying this was not just about the two of us, that I was throwing everything into chaos. I listened, and I did not feel alarmed. That chaos had existed for a long time. It was just more visible today. I told Lily that I needed quiet. She scoffed, asking what I needed quiet for when everything was falling apart. She started talking about her mother, about expectations, about how my salary had become part of a familiar plan. I let her finish. Each sentence made me more certain about the decision I had just made. A sense of relief spread slowly, but clearly. Lily stopped and looked straight at me. In that moment, the house seemed smaller, the air thicker. She asked me in a low but steady voice, as if afraid that this question would change everything. Did you do this to get back at my family? I never liked my wife's family. That feeling did not come from any single incident. It formed very slowly, built up through each meal, each seemingly harmless question. Every time we visited her parents' house, I always felt like I was stepping into a quiet test, where every look waited to see what I would say, what I would do, and more importantly, how much I brought with me. Those meals always started gently. Susan asked about my work, her voice soft, but her eyes never left me. I answered briefly because I knew what would follow was a comparison. Tom was usually mentioned first, held up as the perfect example. He knew how to talk, how to appear generous, how to smile at the right moment. I sat there, heard my name placed next to his, and felt my position clearly. Tom liked to talk about the times he helped the family, his voice full of pride wrapped in a layer of modesty. Susan nodded, Lily smiled, and I stayed silent. No one asked what I thought. It did not seem to matter. I was seen as the one responsible for finances, and that was enough. Susan was very skilled at bringing up money in a way that made people uncomfortable but left no room to argue. She never spoke directly. She talked about loyalty, about support, about how family was where people relied on each other. Every time she spoke like that, her eyes passed over me quickly, like a reminder that I was sitting exactly where I was meant to sit. I realized I was always the one paying the most, not just for meals or travel, but also for extra expenses mentioned casually, as if I had already agreed. No one asked my opinion because in their minds, I was already willing. I began to find that assumption almost amusing. Lily usually said nothing in those moments. She had long been used to that atmosphere. Used to her mother speaking, used to Tom being praised, used to me sitting quietly. Her silence made one thing clear to me. In that world, I did not need protecting, because I was not seen as someone who needed protection. Once, Susan asked me about my upcoming financial plans. The question was framed as concern, but I heard something else beneath it. I answered vaguely, and she nodded, then turned to Tom and asked about his plan to buy a new car. The whole table laughed, while I felt myself neatly pushed aside. Stories like that repeated themselves. I began to remember every small detail, every look, every raised eyebrow. I realized the contempt did not come from only one side. I was changing too. I started looking at them with colder eyes, reevaluating every word they said. My discomfort was no longer a reaction. It became an attitude. At times, I asked myself why I was still sitting there. I could have stood up, could have spoken my mind, but I did not. I chose silence, not because I agreed, but because it felt easier. I let them continue their conversations, and I pulled myself inward, like someone who was there only to make up the numbers. I gradually came to see those meals as an obligation. I showed up. I ate. I listened. And then I left. Each time, the discomfort was neatly put away, waiting for another moment to surface. I no longer expected anything from those gatherings, and that in itself made me feel lighter. In my mind, a thought began to take shape very clearly. If they were used to seeing me as a resource, then I could get used to seeing them as a burden. The contempt was no longer one-sided. I realized I was answering them in my own way, even if no one noticed. When I thought back on those meals, I no longer felt angry. I felt more clear-headed. I understood that my discomfort was not sudden. It was the result of many times being placed in a lower position. And I knew that, deep down, I had already made a decision. I admitted to myself that I was deliberately choosing not to help anymore. My phone rang that afternoon, just as Lily had stepped out of the room. I saw Susan's name on the screen and knew this call was bound to come sooner or later. I did not answer right away. I let it ring a few more times, long enough to wonder how she would choose to open. When I picked up, Susan did not greet me. Her voice was sharp and fast, as if all restraint had already been rehearsed. She said I was stingy, said I had changed, said I had forgotten where I stood. I listened to each word as it fell, clear and decisive, and I did not interrupt, because I wanted to hear it all. Susan went on, her voice rising when she mentioned family. She said I was ungrateful, that I had been accepted by them, treated like one of their own, and now I was doing this. I thought about the meals, the looks, the familiar comparisons. I did not feel that I had ever been accepted in the way she described. Then Susan spoke plainly. She said that if I did not continue providing support, I would be crossed off the family. The sentence came out cleanly, like a decision already approved. I waited to see if fear would appear. It did not. Instead, there was a light emptiness, like when something unpleasant is finally called by its proper name. I replied briefly, saying that I had heard her clearly. Susan paused for a second, perhaps waiting for an apology, or a softened tone. When nothing came, she continued, stressing that I was putting Lily in a difficult position. I knew that. I knew Lily was caught in the middle, and I also knew Susan was using that to pressure me. The call ended shortly after. I set the phone down and sat still for a while. My mind was not as chaotic as I had imagined it might be. Everything felt fairly clear. I had been placed in this position long ago, and today it was simply spoken out loud. Lily came into the room and looked at me questioningly. She knew who had just called. I told her everything, without adding or subtracting, without softening the words. When I mentioned the threat of being cut off, Lily froze. She sat down, her hands clenched together, as if trying to hold something from falling apart. I told Lily that I needed her to understand me. I said I was tired of being referred to as an obligation. I said I did not want to keep living inside that assumption. I did not raise my voice, and I did not circle around the point. I said what I believed needed to be said. Lily stayed silent for a long time, then she cried. The tears came quickly, and I realized it was rare for her to cry like that in front of me. She said she did not know who to choose. One side was her mother, her family, who had raised her. The other side was me, sitting across from her and asking her to stand with me. I looked at Lily and felt a strange sense of distance. I understood her dilemma, but I also understood that this was the point where things could no longer remain vague. I did not comfort her. I did not make promises. I let that choice rest between us, heavy and unmistakable. Lily said that Susan would not let this go. She said the family would not accept it. I nodded. I had heard enough of those things. In that moment, I realized I was no longer afraid of losing my place in that family. The thought came naturally, without effort. When Lily left the room, I stayed behind alone. The house was quiet, and this quiet was different from before. It was not an uncomfortable silence, but an open space that was easy to breathe in. I thought about Susan's words, about being crossed off, and I felt a sense of relief slip in. For the first time, I thought that being crossed off might actually be less trouble. I changed the password to the joint account the next morning, clean and deliberate, without any further thought. Everything happened exactly as I had planned, fast and precise. I did not tell Lily. I knew she would discover it when she needed to, and that moment would speak for me more clearly than any explanation. I reset the transfers. Each month, Lily received exactly the fixed amount for the expenses of our small family, no more and no less. I saw that as a reasonable boundary. I was still fulfilling my role, at least by my own definition. The rest, I kept in my personal account. Lily realized very quickly. She did not ask right away, perhaps because she still hoped it was just a glitch. I saw that hesitation in her eyes, then watched it turn into worry. I said nothing. I wanted her to understand that things had changed and that this change was intentional. That evening, I came home later than usual. The house was quiet. I heard Lily's voice coming from the bedroom, low and rushed. She was on the phone. I stopped in the hallway, not trying to listen in, but her words reached me clearly. Lily said there was no money right now. Her voice trembled as she explained, as if apologizing on my behalf. On the other end, I guessed it was Susan. I heard Lily mention the hospital, mentioning that Robert needed urgent tests. Hearing my father-in-law's name made me pay closer attention. I stood still and listened longer. Lily said Robert was seriously ill and needed to be hospitalized soon. She said the costs were not small. I could feel the tension in every sentence. This was not a story made up to apply pressure. I knew they truly needed money. Susan answered in a sharp tone. I could not make out every word, but I heard the blame. Lily tried to explain that they could not manage it right now, that I had changed the way I handled the money. Her voice grew softer, then caught. I realized Lily was being scolded. The call ended shortly after. Lily stayed quiet for a moment, then went into the bathroom. The door closed. I heard the water running, then restrained crying, very soft but steady. I stood in the living room with my hand on the table, and what I felt was not unclear. I knew they were struggling. I knew Robert needed money. I also knew Susan was expecting me to soften once illness was mentioned. I did not deny any of that, but I did not feel it was enough to change my decision. I was too used to every emergency being placed on my shoulders. I thought back to the meals, the talk of family bonds, the words that made it clear I was seen as a stable resource. I asked myself how quickly everything would return to the old track if I unlocked the card again. The answer came immediately, fast enough to make me uncomfortable. Lily came out of the bathroom with red eyes. She did not look at me right away. She said her father was very weak, that her mother was falling apart. She did not ask me to help, at least not directly. But I heard the plea in every pause between her words. I looked at Lily and said that I had already transferred enough money for our household expenses. I said I could not take on additional costs outside the plan. My voice was even and low. I did not mention the hospital. I did not mention Robert. I spoke as if it were a purely transactional exchange, without emotion. Lily looked at me, her eyes mixed with disappointment and disbelief. She asked if I understood how serious the situation was. I nodded. I did. I knew very well. That was exactly why I did not want to step back. I did not want to once again become the default solution for every problem in her family. That night, Lily barely slept. I heard her turning over many times. I lay still, my thoughts clear. I did not see myself as cruel. I saw myself as teaching them a necessary lesson, whether they wanted to learn it or not. I heard Lily crying again in the bathroom, very soft but enough to stay with me. I knew that with just a few taps on my phone, everything could be resolved immediately. I put the phone down and turned away. I still did not unlock the card, because I wanted her parents to ask their generous and successful son-in-law. I spoke directly to Lily the next morning, while the house still smelled of cold coffee. I did not choose a gentle moment. I chose when everything was tense. I told her she had to choose either my family, or the sentence dropped cleanly between us, without any let-in. I watched Lily's reaction like someone who had placed a chess piece and was waiting for the other side to move. Lily froze. She asked if I was serious. I nodded. I said I had endured enough, that every boundary had been pushed too far. I said a marriage needed a center, and that center had to be the husband and wife. I did not lower my voice, and I did not raise it. I let the firmness sit in my choice of words. In my mind, the option of divorce had already been neatly filed away. I thought of it as a reasonable exit, not a disaster. I had considered the costs, the daily schedule, and the custody of our child. I did not say any of that out loud, but that preparation made me calmer as I looked at Lily. I knew I was pushing her into a corner, and I accepted that. Lily said she needed time. I did not give it to her. I said time had already passed for too long. I repeated that I did not want to keep living in a situation where I was pulled toward her parents every time something happened. I said I needed someone who would stand on my side. Lily's eyes wavered, and I realized I was holding the upper hand. I believed Lily loved me. I believed she would not dare to leave. That belief did not come from romance. It came from the years I had carried most of the financial responsibility, from the habit of relying on the stability I provided. I thought she would choose the safe option, and I was that option. That afternoon, Evan asked if we could visit his grandparents that weekend. He said it naturally, like a routine. I looked at my son and saw the expectation clearly in his eyes. I did not answer right away. I let him keep talking, saying that his grandmother made his favorite food, and that his grandfather was tired. I told Evan we were not going this time. I said it plainly, without detours. He asked why. I said our family was busy. I did not explain further. Evan stood still for a few seconds, then nodded, as if trying to understand a decision that did not belong to him. Lily heard the conversation. She turned to look at me, her eyes both angry and hurt. She asked if I really needed to pull our son into this. I replied that I was not pulling anyone in. I was setting boundaries for our small family. I said our child needed to get used to prioritizing our own household first. I spoke with confidence. Lily said Evan had the right to see his grandparents. I asked whether that right stood above our family's right to live in peace. The question left Lily silent. I knew I was saying something hard to hear, but I also knew it hit exactly where she did not want to look. Evan went back to his room, the door closing softly. I heard a toy being set down. I knew he was sad. The feeling passed over me, quick and shallow. I told myself that children eventually adapt to change, as long as the adults appear certain. That evening, Lily did not eat much. She said I was using our marriage as a condition, and using our child as leverage. I did not argue back. I said I was forcing things back into an order that I believed was right. I said that if I did not do this, we would keep being pulled along endlessly. Lily asked whether I had thought about the consequences. I said I had thought it through carefully. I said that a decisive choice was better than drawn-out compromises. I could hear myself speaking in the voice of someone who had already chosen his path, and that steadiness made me feel firm. As night fell, Evan came out of his room and stood in the hallway. He asked softly if there was any chance we might change our minds about the weekend. I looked at my son, at the remaining hope in his eyes. I shook my head. Evan lowered his head and went back into his room. The door closed. This time harder. I stood alone in the living room, listening to the silence spread. I knew I had just used my marriage and my son as leverage. I also knew I had no intention of taking it back. When I thought of Evan's sad face, a thought surfaced, very clear and very cold. He would get used to it. The call from the hospital came at noon, while I was at the office. The voice on the other end was clear. My mother, Helen, needed surgery soon. They stated the amount almost immediately. I listened, asked about one single detail, then hung up. No further information was needed. I opened my banking app and transferred the money. The process was so smooth that I barely registered that it was done. No calculations, no weighing options, no calls to anyone. The money left my account as if it had already been waiting to go. It felt completely reasonable to me. I called the hospital back to confirm. Then I called my mother. Helen answered with a tired voice, still trying to speak quickly to say she was fine. I told her the money had been transferred and that she just needed to rest. On the other end, she was silent for a few seconds, then thanked me. Her thanks were brief, but enough to put me at ease. That afternoon, Helen called Lily. I found out when I got home. Lily was standing in the kitchen, holding her phone, looking at me with an expression different from usual. She said my mother had just called to thank her for helping in time. Lily's voice was lower than normal, as if she were trying to stay composed. I nodded. I did not explain. I treated it as a given. In my mind, there was no comparison being made. My mother needed help, and I had the means, so I helped. Everything followed a very clear straight line. I saw nothing to debate. Dinner passed in silence. Evan finished eating early and went to his room. Lily cleaned up more slowly than usual. I sat at the table and waited. I knew this conversation was coming, and I knew I would not avoid it. Lily came back and sat across from me. She asked if we could talk for a moment. I nodded. She began by saying she was glad my mother had been taken care of in time. Then she paused, took a deep breath, and asked why things were so different. I asked her a different how. Lily said something different about how quickly and decisively I acted. She said she did not understand why. When her father was sick, everything became complicated. I looked at Lily and clearly saw the strain in her eyes. I replied that these were two different matters. I said my mother was my responsibility. I said helping had to have limits, and I had set those limits already. My voice was even, neither raised nor lowered. I did not think I needed to soften my words. Lily asked if I could hear myself. She said that to me. Her family always seemed to fall outside those limits. She mentioned the past few days, mentioned her father needing money, and mentioned the phone call the night before. Her voice began to shake. I answered that I had been providing support for 3 years. I said I had done my part. I said it could not be that every time her family had an issue, I had to carry it. I saw Lily clench her hands, as if trying to keep something from breaking. The conversation quickly turned into an argument. Lily said I was biased. I said I was practical. Lily said I was cold. I said I was clear. Those words collided, neither willing to give way. I realized I was speaking more than I had planned, but I did not stop. Lily stood up and paced around the room. She said I was splitting the family in two. I asked whether it was fair that all the pressure was placed on me. She was silent for a moment, then said that I had never truly seen her family as my family. I looked at Lily and did not argue right away. I knew that was what she believed. I also knew I had no intention of changing her way of thinking at that moment. I said that I had chosen to act in the way I believed was right, and I did not apologize for it. The air in the room grew heavier. Lily stopped in front of me and looked straight at me. She asked one question, very slowly, very clearly, as if placing something on the table that could not be taken back. If the one lying there were my father, would you do the same? Lily's question hung in the air between us. I did not answer right away. I looked at her, at the mix of expectation and disappointment in her eyes, and I knew that any answer would close a door. I chose to stay silent for a few more seconds, long enough to confirm for myself what I had believed from the start. I said that I was not wrong. I stated it clearly. Over the past 3 years, I had provided support consistently. I said numbers did not lie. That I had carried a share many others would have avoided. I did not raise my voice, and I did not step back. I laid it out like a summary, neat and orderly. Lily sat down, her hands resting on her knees. She asked if I could hear myself. I nodded. I heard very clearly. I said that now my mother needed help, and I helped. That was obvious. I said my priority was my family, and I saw no reason to ask permission for that. Lily said the way I divided the family made her feel excluded. She said I had built a boundary she could not cross. I looked at Lily and thought that the boundary had existed for a long time. It was just drawn more boldly today. She said she no longer felt respected. The word was repeated several times, heavier each time. I listened and felt confused. I asked what respect meant, whether it meant that I kept carrying every responsibility. Lily shook her head and said respect was being heard, was not being forced into choosing. The conversation lasted longer than I expected. We went over what had happened, each of us holding tightly to our own perspective. I said I set boundaries to protect our small family. Lily said I used those boundaries to control. The two interpretations stood against each other, neither willing to yield. Lily stood up, walked to the window, and then turned back. She said she had tried very hard to balance everything, but the more she tried, the more she felt herself disappearing. She said that for 5 years, she had always been the one in the middle, and now she could not continue like that. I said I was not forcing her to stay. I said that if she could not take it anymore, we could stop. The words left my mouth more lightly than I expected. I had considered this possibility before, so saying it did not shake me. Lily looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded, slowly. She said maybe we should end it. She said she did not want to live in a marriage where she had to ask permission to feel safe. I listened, and did not argue. I felt things moving toward the point I had already imagined. The days that followed passed in a strange order. We spoke less, mostly about practical matters. Lily packed her things in Evans. I did not stop her. I thought decisiveness would be better for everyone. I still believed I was doing the right thing. When Lily told me she would move out, I nodded. She said she needed space to stand on her own. I said I respected that decision. Inside me, there was no sense of how people describe it. I felt light, as if long-held pressure had just been released. The day Lily left, I helped her carry a few boxes out to the car. Evan stood next to his mother, silent. I patted my son's head and said that everything would be fine. He did not say anything. He just looked at me for a long time. I turned away before that look made me think any further. After the car disappeared from the driveway, the house became quiet. I walked into the living room, sat down on the chair, and took a deep breath. I thought about what had just happened, about a marriage that had lasted 5 years, and about the decision I had just made. I did not feel regret. I believed Lily was too weak to understand my choice. I believed that there were times when firmness was necessary, and not everyone could bear its cost. I stood up, looked around the house, and felt that I had taken back control. I stepped out of the house, closed the door behind me, and in that moment, I felt something rise clearly inside me, the feeling that I had just won. Lily left on an ordinary morning. I did not walk her all the way out. I stood in the living room, listening to the door open and close, listening to her footsteps fade away. There were no final instructions, no extra words. I thought the silence at that moment fit the way everything had ended. Her family stopped calling. My phone was strangely quiet. No reminder messages, no roundabout check-in calls. I realized I had achieved what I wanted. A clear and clean separation. The sense of relief came quickly, like a reward for prolonged firmness. I checked my bank account out of habit. The numbers sat still, untouched by unexpected expenses. I felt that I was in control of everything. Cash flow, daily routines, big and small decisions all returned to a single axis. That axis was me. The house became quiet in a very different way. There were no more conversations in the kitchen. No familiar footsteps in the hallway. In the evenings, I ate alone, cleaned up alone, and turned off the lights on my own schedule. I felt order spreading through the space, from the living room to the bedroom. Evan stayed with Lily. I got used to hearing my son's voice on the phone at scheduled times. He spoke more briefly than before. I asked about school, and he answered enough. I said everything would be fine, and I believed it. I did not think further about the pauses between his answers. I began reorganizing my life in the way I thought made sense. Work took up more time. In the evenings, I read reports, reviewed financial plans, and set new goals. I felt more efficient, more focused, less pulled toward things that did not belong to me. Sometimes I sat in the living room and looked at the chair Lily used to sit in. I did not feel sad in the familiar sense. The feeling was like cleaning a room and realizing a space had just been created. That empty space did not scare me, it made me feel order. People I knew asked how things were. I answered briefly that we had decided to go our separate ways. I did not explain further. I did not feel the need to. Everyone had their own perspective, and I had no desire to convince them to understand. Some evenings, I opened a cabinet and found a few leftover items. I stacked them neatly in a corner. I did not rush to throw them out, nor did I rush to move them. I left them there as part of the organizing process. Things not in use would be dealt with later. I thought about what I had kept. Money, control, and the ability to make decisions without asking anyone else. I felt I had protected those things well. I believed that if I had not done so, I would have been pulled back into the old cycle. Sometimes, very late at night, I sat still and let my thoughts drift. I remembered evenings when the whole family ate together, scattered conversations, and conflicts that were never fully resolved. I did not try to pull emotion from those memories. I let them pass. I realized that something had been lost, but I did not name it. Naming it would bring questions, and I did not see the need to answer them. I chose this path, and every path has its price. I accepted that. The house is quiet in the way I once wanted. This quiet is not interrupted by anyone, not crowded by outside expectations. I sit down, take a deep breath, and let the silence settle over me. I think I am ready to live with it, at least for now. I kept the money, but lost a complete family. This story has no absolute right or wrong, only choices and the costs that come with them. If you see yourself or someone you know in my story, share your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to follow the channel and share this story so we can discuss together the boundaries, responsibilities, and true values within marriage.